What's up, Sales Samurai? Just Sensei here. And in today's training called the Sales Bender, I'm going to show you guys exactly how I approach different personality types, difficult conversations, and most importantly, how to adapt your communication style when actually communicating with a bunch of different personalities in sales, right? Because one of the biggest challenges that I personally face is a script is not going to be able to tell you how to adapt to different personality types. So my intention in today's training is I'm going to help you develop two key skill sets, which is one, something I call social acuity, and two, emotional adaptability during sales conversations. So I actually learned part of this from my sales mentor, Eli Wild, right? And as I continue to actually develop it, I decided to expand upon it and go a little bit deeper into some of the initial concepts that he taught me. Now, why this is super important, right, is we all know something which is the truth here, which is not every sales conversation is going to be the same, right? You're not equipped to deal with different personality types effectively when you're just relying on a script. So if a prospect goes off track, how do we actually adapt our approach to his or her different personality type, right? Second, I'm going to teach you guys how to create more flow instead of forcing a certain way onto a different prospect, right? And if you understand this flow, this actually increases your likelihood of closing the deal. So I'm going to teach you the skill set that I've personally developed on top of what Eli taught me so that you can identify what I call their sales element, adapt your approach authentically, so we have an increase in communication and overall understanding for each other. Now, here's the thing. If you master what I call all four sales elements and become the quote unquote sales bender, you come to your calls grounded, confident, and certain you can be in control of any circumstance actually thrown at you. So before we go into a little bit of this training, I want to define the different things, what I mean by social acuity and emotional adaptability. So let's first define this, right? Like if you've never really heard these terms before, they might sound like a foreign language to you. But basically, social acuity is the ability and inclination to perceive the psychological state of others and act accordingly. Right? So one of the best ways to think about this is like, I want to be in tune with what is the current state of this prospect and how do I actually adapt that? And emotional adaptability is actually very similar to it, but there's a little bit of a change in nuance there, right? It's your ability to change your behavior and approach authentically based on the other person's current emotions, right? The way that I kind of think about this is there's a different wide range of emotions that can happen during a sales call. For example, someone might hop on in the beginning during discovery, super excited, like super confident and like enthusiastic. And then by the end, during the close, when you've dropped the price, their emotion goes from being super confident to now being very fearful and anxious and doubtful, right? So even if you have a different person or a specific personality type, right? That personality type might have a wide range of emotions. So for us, we want to be able to adapt to that so we increase the likelihood of actually closing the deal. One of my strengths that I've developed throughout the years is almost being like a social chameleon during a call. And it's not I'm changing my personality, right? I'm not trying to be fake or I'm trying to be someone I'm not. It's actually just adapting different parts of my personality and most importantly, communication style based on where they're at, based on where they're at in the call, and most importantly, the different type of persona that person might be. So let's get into what the actual four sales elements are right now. So we have our drivers, what I call earth. We have our analytical, which is air. We have our expressives, which are fire. And we have our amiables, which is water, right? So I don't know how much personality type, research you guys have done. I've done quite a bit on this. I love kind of the different Myers-Briggs, the Ocean test, the Colby test. I've done a bunch of different types of personality styles. And you don't need to be a master of understanding all these different tests, right? I want to simplify these concepts to you that are actually relevant for closing deals and have a very simple framework for you to think about on every single call, So before we go into what each of these personality types are on these sales conversations, I actually want to share with you guys, for anyone who doesn't know the show Avatar: The Last Airbender, this was actually one of my favorite TV shows growing up as a kid, right? And long story short, what it really is this person who's destined for mastering all four elements in this world that has, magic. So fire, water, wind, earth, right? And Aang, the main character of the show, is actually tasked throughout the show to master all four elements. He actually only starts with one, which is air. That's his personal element, right? But as he learns all these different elements, he learns from different mentors, he learns from his different friends, he actually starts to master all the different elements one at a time. He masters water, then he masters earth, and then he finalizes it with mastering fire. And by the end of the show, he has mastered all four elements to actually defeat the quote unquote bad guy, right? So he's this hero that saves planet Earth because he was able to master all four elements. And why I share this is because it's one of the best ways to actually think about how we need to adapt and learn all these different personalities, right? You might be a specific element. You might be a specific personality type, right? You might be a driver type, an earth style. That doesn't mean you should only stick with that if you want to master sales and really be able to close all different types of personalities. So here's the thing. I'm going to teach you guys how to adapt to all these different personalities. How might you adapt discovery, the pitch, objection handling, depending on what I call their sales element. So let's go a little bit deeper into what all these different elements actually are. So the first one is earth, what I call the driver type. So you guys might have seen these type of personalities where they come across the call, hands crossed, right? They're to the point. They're just kind of talk in a very monotone or stoic manner. And they're kind of a difficult personality to open up, right? So the reason why it's air is because these people are often grounded, right? If you try to use a very salesy conversation with them or try to be overly enthusiastic or expressive, it might not really work that well, right? In fact, you might have heard on a call before, hey man, I know this is a sales call. Just get to the point, right? They're very to the point. They're very driving the conversation. Sometimes you might even face a challenge where they're trying to almost be an a-hole, get you past, the salesy questions, and they just want you to tell them the price. So a lot of the times when you come across drivers or the earth element, you really have to adapt your approach differently, right? So that's the earth element. Now, from there is what I call the analytical or air element. So these people are very precise, very left-brained. They're people who really thrive off understanding numbers and understanding, hey, what is the ROI? In fact, if you try to use a bunch of stories or try to use a bunch of, different rapport building, connecting type questions, they don't really jive with that, right? What they want to see is the numbers. They want to dig deep into that. They want to be able to, run and crunch the numbers, make sure there's an ROI, maybe even look through the math. These are the type of people who, if you connect the left brain, turn data into stories, right? Try to understand what they care about, then the likelihood of them actually enrolling when they can see a positive ROI is golden, right? That's what we want to do for people who are air. Expressives. So this is my personal natural element, right? I call this the fire element. And these are people who go into the call, sharing almost every single detail that they want to share. They talk a lot. They're expressive. They want to tell stories. They are actually even easier to talk to, what I've personally found. But the downside is they're often so talkative that they actually derail the conversation. They can be scattered. They can go on tangents. They can even, quote unquote, get out of control like a fire. And maybe 10 minutes go by and you haven't even been able to ask a question or even, get a word in because they're talking so much. So we actually got to be able to maintain direction and clarity in a process for these people who are more the fire element, right? Last but not least is amiable or water, right? They're very nurturing. The people who are very heart-centered. They're almost very driven specifically by impact and, their vision, their mission, their purpose in life, right? You come across a lot of these types of people in the coaching space who, they're very like ambitious in the impact that they want to do, but they might not be as money driven, or they might be people who are a little bit more like soft spoken or meek, right? If you come across too assertive or too like enthusiastic, these people might actually shrink and shut down from that. So a lot of these, of course, are not confined to one generality, right? These are in essence a little bit stereotypical. But the truth is, why this is important to understand is if you can recognize these patterns and understand it's really these 4 core elements that you'll see in a call, you can adapt and match the element accordingly, right? So at the end of the day, we're going to go a little bit deeper into how to actually adapt your approach to each element so that you can actually communicate at a higher level with each person, right? And here's the thing. How I adapt the approach to each element is going to be different for the different phases of the call. So discovery is going to be different. The pitch is going to be different. Even the close is going to be different. And sometimes, here's the thing, is you might encounter people with more than one element. So you might catch people who are primarily, let's say, expressive, but they also might have a secondary element of being a little bit more of a driver, right? So at the end of the day, it's an art, not a science, right? There is no specific if this, then do this. But we want to create frameworks so we increase the level of understanding for our prospect. That's what's important at the end of the day. So that's just planting the seed on these different elements. I'm going to get a little bit more tactical in future trainings on how to adapt to each one. But I really just wanted to open the loop on the understanding of these frameworks so we know it exists. Because if we know it exists, if we become aware to these different elements that people go through, then we can actually adapt accordingly, right? So with that being said, we're going to go to my whiteboard right now that I've planted the seed on what these different elements are. And I'm going to get a little bit more tactical on these different things. Okay, cool, guys. So here's the thing. We're going to first talk about the drivers. I want us to understand the motivation behind every specific personality type because, I've talked about this in past training, but one of the most important things that you can actually extract during a sales call is get someone's dominant buying motivation, right? What is the one thing that is motivating them to be on this call? And if we successfully align our offering and our pitch to that dominant buying motive, right, their core driver, we're going to get an enrollment here. We're going to get a close. So let's define the different generalities of the dominant buying motive for each personality type. So first, the driver, aka earth element, right? These people I've personally found are very goal driven, right? So sometimes if you try to go crazy into like, oh, well, hey, what's the impact of this? Like, how does this personally make you feel? Or what's your challenge? They're not always going to respond well to that, right? So I might even have a more goal or vision focused conversation with these people so I can find what they really care about, which is getting their goal, right? These are people who are very outcome focused. They're focused on achievement. They're focused on being the future version of themselves as soon as possible, right? So what they're really just looking for during a conversation is, can you help me get to my goal, right? They're not always going to be the most open book. In fact, they might answer some of your questions with like 1 or 2 words. And that's a little bit of the challenge with drivers, right? They are hard to move. And oftentimes they will try to outframe you or gain control of the call. So our biggest thing isn't trying to out posture them. And what I mean by out posture isn't, what I don't want to do with drivers is I don't want to start to try to gain so much frame control, try to create a superior posturing, because it's just 2 bulls in a china shop trying to butt heads. So in fact, with my drivers, I like to just flow and even give them almost a false sense of control on the call. I'm very to the point, And how I adapt my approach is oftentimes I'm very succinct in my communication. So here's how it might actually sound like. All right, Josh, so I know you don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste my time either. Let's just get to the point. Is that fair enough? Right? So I might create a frame like that if I'm getting a little bit of a combative nature from a driver and I'm just going straight to it. All right, Josh, so what's your goal for the business in the next 3 to 6 months? Boom. Okay, and I guess just as a leader, like what's your biggest challenge with your team right now that you're personally facing? All right, got it. And how does, I guess, as a leader, how are you seeing that affecting the rest of your team when you have a lack of lead gen there? Got it. Okay. And so, hey man, it sounds like you're a smart guy, right? We both know that. What have you personally tried? Like, have you gone through coaching before? Have you gone through different masterminds? Like, what have you personally tried? All right. And just to see if we can be a fit, like, what are you ideally looking for when it comes to a coach so that we can put you in a position where you're making $50K per month in your business? Okay. Makes a lot of sense. So just so I'm hearing this right, what you're really looking for is more of the strategies and the tactics because you've already gotten a lot of the mindset work. Did I hear that right? Cool. So if you notice with my communication style, it's very direct. I'm not sugarcoating it. I'm not trying to sound like super friendly. Like I'm just getting straight to the point with drivers because I'm really just matching it where they are. Oftentimes they don't want the salesy questions. So I'm just going to meet them where they're at and just go straight to the point just as much as they are. Right? So that is the driver personality type and how I might be able to communicate with them. So now let's talk about more of the analytical types. Here's the thing with analyticals. They're really motivated by numbers, right? So they often just want to see the facts. They want to see that it's real, right? So they often just want to see like testimonials or case studies. They want to see that things are proven, right? Oftentimes, you might even get some of these questions from these people, which is like, hey man, like I get the theory of this, but can you show me like what this actually looks like? Like when you say funnel, can I actually see the funnel itself? So oftentimes what I've personally found with drivers is I'm doing a couple different things during the pitch specifically, is I'm actually doing like a screen share. Right. So I'm actually might be showing them the funnel. I might be showing them the actual system. I might actually be showing them numbers that we've helped achieve with past clients because I want to appease the left side of their brain and they're motivated by numbers and most importantly, profit and ROI. They want to see that they're actually getting an ROI from investing. If they put 10K into the investment, they want to know they're getting a 20 or 30K return, right? So I often, during my pitch and even during my discovery, I'm making it very numbers heavy. Now, you're going to hear me say this term, turn data into stories a lot, right? So I don't want to just get the data, but I might ask them more expanding upon it. Okay, so Josh, I understand that 30K per month is your goal. Like what's actually behind that specific number for you? What does that actually do for you, right? So I might actually start to get them to visualize why there is that number that they put behind certain things. And if they can't go there, I'm going to share with them exactly why that's important. So it's not just enough for me to say, hey, 30K is a great number. I might actually say, well, here's what we found, what happens when you hit 30K per month. You're actually in a position to cash flow consistently. You can start thinking about hiring teams so we can buy you back more time. And you told me earlier, Josh, that you're spending about 40 hours in delivery in your coaching business. We're going to cut that 40 hours to 20 hours a week. Can you imagine what you'd be able to do if you had 20 hours more? What do you think is actually possible for you? So I'm going to get them to go deeper into what is the why or what is the story, what is the impact of the actual data. Right? And I do that with all different personality types, but specifically with the analytical or wind, I'm going to go even deeper with them, right? So a lot of the times when I'm even doing, for example, discovery with these types of people, I'm going heavy into numbers. So I'm thinking about asking them questions like, all right, what are your profit margins? What's your revenue, right? How much time specifically are you spending on, delivery with your team, working in the business, on the business? So I might do a bigger and deeper dig into those numbers. So to recap, that is the analytical, aka the wind, right? They're very motivated by numbers. They're very motivated by ROI. The way that I want to talk to them is very matter of fact, right? Just very matter of fact, almost objective. Next from there is the expressive, or what I call the fire element, right? So I'm personally an expressive. I like to talk a lot of stories, all these different things. But what I'm really motivated by, right, is oftentimes the actual vision or status, right? So it's a little bit different than the actual driver. And drivers are very like achievement and goal oriented. Expressives are very like vision and status oriented. So what I mean by that is a lot of the times they care a lot about their influence, right? They care a lot about like how they look to other people. So they're very big on like self-image. And they're very motivated by their future self and how not only will the people that they impact feel, but how they're personally going to feel, right? So I like to use and adapt my approach with expressives in one of two ways. So one of the things that I like to create with expressives is I actually like to give them a clear and controlled path for thinking. Because here's the thing, expressives, we are big dreamers. And sometimes we are not grounded in reality, right? Drivers, analyticals, very grounded most of the time in objective reality. Us, expressives, are often grounded in the sky and the big dreams. And it's this big, grandiose vision that often needs the more left brain, clear path to actually think through. Because our biggest problem is that our thinking can be a bit scattered, right? So the solution to that is having a very clear, concise process for these people. So the upside is oftentimes expressives will be very open to talking with you. So when you ask a question, they're going to answer it very openly, right? Here's the problem, is they will also get off track. So if you don't learn how to do something what I call graceful interruption, that's a key tactic to actually deploy with expressives. If you don't know how to deploy graceful interruption, meaning how do I, without sounding like an a-hole or without, making sure that you sound very combative, how can I just steer them in the right direction of thinking, right? So I have another video on the exact way on how to actually do graceful interruptions, but I'm not going to go deep into that right now. I'm just going to tell you that this is probably one of the best things that I learned when I learned how to do it correctly. I not only gained control with more of my expressive types, but most importantly, I actually served them in a way that they didn't eventually think about, which was I took them from a place of chaos to a place of clarity in their thinking. They have a lot of great ideas. And our job and how we have to adapt is we have to make sure we're connecting the dots in their brain accordingly. Make it a clear path into actually thinking so that they have a visual to actually see how your solution and their pains will be solved through what you guys are talking about. Because here's how most expressives are thinking. It's very scattered. And if you allow them to just have that quote unquote fire out of control, right? It's not going to be good news for the call. In fact, you guys, this is personally something I've faced, is with expressives is there's literally times where I ask one question and the old me would have let them rant for like 5 to 10 minutes. And you realize, you look at your clock, 10 minutes have gone by and we're still talking about who knows what. They're not even talking about the relevant pain, or maybe they are talking about the pain, but they're not going deep enough because now they're caught up in this story that isn't relevant to what you guys even need to talk about. So with expressives, how I adapt my approach is I'm very like quick with it, right? I don't want to sound, like combative with them, but what I will be is I will match their enthusiastic energy, but also interrupt them. So here's how it might sound like. Awesome, Josh. First off, thank you for sharing that. That's awesome that you have this big vision. You said something that was super important, which is you're actually looking to make this a big brand one day, right? Like, let me just ask you, like, what's the biggest thing that's getting in the way of you building the brand right now, right? So I might not be as stoic with the driver and talking like this and very to the point, and I might not be very dry and objective like with the analyticals, right? I might actually match their more expressive energy, but just be like one level below it, right? Keep them on track. Make sure that they're not like going off the rails when I'm going on the conversation, and really just directing their clear thinking there. So that's really the expressive. Like I mentioned, like they're very motivated by big dreams, by their vision, their status, their self-image, the opinions of others even, right? And that's just what the expressive is, right? So if we can keep that fire tamed, you have a nice furnace or quote unquote fireplace for them to go through, right? Because when we think about it, fire, when controlled, is a beautiful thing. It's a great source of energy. But when fire is out of whack and it's out of control, it creates these forest fires, it creates destruction. And that's what expressives often do in calls, is a self-destructive manner because they talk too much, right? So that is the expressive there. Last but not least, we have our amiable types, right? AKA water. So amiables are often motivated by impact, right? So you might hear them say a lot of the times that, oh, I'm not very money driven, right? All I really care about is like creating this mission, right? I want to be able to help as many people as possible, right? This is the type of people who are, when handled accordingly, they actually make really great clients because they have a big heart, right? So for them, I think of these like very heart-centered people, and the tonality that these people often use is very like soft-spoken, right? They might be someone who is very like even more meek or more introverted, more shy. And oftentimes how I want to adapt the approach, even as we're talking right here, is I might want to slow down my talking just a little bit like this. And I might have some more pauses. And I want them to understand, most importantly, this key thing, which is I am listening, right? So I just wanted to actually demonstrate that amiable, more tonality with you. So with amiables, I have this concept of holding space, right? Holding space. So I often just like really listen, take note, be very present on the call with them, and just let them talk. Because when you hold space properly for an amiable personality type, what happens is they actually build trust. And we all know when trust is built, that is what is one of the best factors for someone actually enrolling. Here's the thing. With amiable types, they get very like, I wouldn't say offended, but very like skeptical or distrustful of people who are fast talkers, for people who are overly aggressive or assertive, right? Domineering, or even people who are very dry, right? So what we have to do is we have to kind of like slow down the pace, sink in, use like more warmer, nurturing, compassionate tonality, and really just meet them where they're at, right? So I always focus when I'm thinking about discovery for amiable types. What I'm really focused on is I want them to very much talk about the impact that they want to have on others. And I also want them to even sometimes get into the pain. So this is where it might be more appropriate to ask, well, Susie, let me just ask you, you struggling with some of the finances and not being able to really have a consistent stream of income, how's that personally affecting you, right? So sometimes you can even ask a little bit more personal questions if you gain the trust of amiables, because they will open up if you're holding space. You're listening, you're kind of refraining from interrupting too much, right? Amiables are people who really care. They're very heart-centered. They're very compassionate about the work they do. So I might not always be talking in the terms of like numbers and ROI. They might just need to know that you care. Because a lot of amiables have actually been distrustful of the market because they've been burnt in the past. They've tried things and it didn't go their way, X, Y, and Z. These people oftentimes also, they don't always know how to communicate their worth. So they might be undercharging or X, Y, and Z. So we want to sometimes even encourage these people to like rise up into their potential, right? So here's another framework that I'll share with you in a little bit when we're thinking of all the different personality types. But I often want them to be encouraged in their mission, to see their potential, to really like almost not have that quote unquote imposter syndrome, right? So with amiable types, like I mentioned, they're very, very motivated by the impact. They're very in tune with their emotions and feeling, right? So I can have a little bit more of that emotional, like little feeling conversation with these type of people. And sometimes what we want to avoid with amiables is sometimes numbers, talking too much about features, talking too much in the left side of the brain, right, can actually be overwhelming for them. So compared to analyticals where you can like share the numbers, break it down, show the ROI, analyticals will love that. Amiables might actually be viewing that as more daunting and overwhelming, and you might get more, let me think about it, right? Oftentimes, like something that I've noticed with amiables is at the end of the call, like you'll hear different things like, let me just feel into this, or let me pray about this, or let me meditate on this. I just want to make sure it feels good, right? So at the end and closing the call, I might just be holding space, letting them process, being on their side, right? So that's really the amiable type, right? Those are the 4 elements. Again, to recap, we have the amiable types, we have the expressive types, we have the analytical types, we have the driver types. The way that I invite you to think about it is there's like a 2 kind of key framework that I have to make this also simple. With drivers and analyticals, because they are more left side of the brain, they're actually risen up and actually respond well to challenge. So challenging a driver, challenging an analytical type, and, you know, for example, poking holes at their business or their health plan or their dating life or relationship life, they're actually driven by challenges. They rise up to the occasion and they want to do something when you challenge them. So using language like, hey, Josh, is it okay if I just challenge you to think about that a different way? They're actually going to openly invite it, and I'm going to invite you to think they're actually going to respect that more. There's times where with the drivers, I've actually challenged them, and they were initially like skeptical, and as soon as I challenged them, they actually opened up more, right? Where if you challenge maybe an amiable or expressive type, they might actually shrink and see that as like a negative. So what I do with expressives and amiables is I do something else, which is I actually encourage them. So what I do is I encourage them to see into their potential and really just almost kind of like coddling them in a way, but nurturing them in a way. It's like, hey, like I can appreciate that you haven't really had the help that you need there, Susie, right? Or maybe an expressive is like, hey man, I'm going to encourage you that you're on the right path, that you have all these great ideas, and the only thing that you need now is the right game plan and systems to really take all this genius into one clear step-by-step process to help you get to 20K per month, right? So with them, it's just encouraging them, like amplifying their energy and seeing the best version of themselves, because sometimes they might have imposter syndrome. These guys, analyticals, drivers, maybe it's not even imposter syndrome. They just got too much of a big ego. So I want to challenge them to kind of like in a tactful way to actually see that, one, I'm not afraid to poke holes in their business, and 2, that they're not, you know, they don't know everything, that there's actually different ways for them to go through that. So at the end of the day, a lot of these guys are, you know, going to be a little bit more rougher or just to the point. So challenging them actually helps them think clearly. So that's it, guys. I wanted to show the different ways that I'd actually approach this. Now, I'll have the specific scripting with all these different personality types in future trainings, but I wanted to give the high level because when you have this framework, when you understand the 4 elements, and when you actually understand your specific element, right? So if you know you're an expressive or a driver, amiable, or an analytical, you can adapt your approach to the different personality types accordingly, right? And the thing that I think is really important is when you start to actually, step by step, learn these different approaches. So for example, if you are more of a analytical salesperson or business owner, you're already good with numbers. So the next thing that you might need to master, right? If you've already mastered air, we might need to master fire. So understanding how to actually sell more of the expressive types, right? Using stories, getting them to think about their self-image, their influence, right? And what ends up happening is when you only understand how to sell one person, right? So I'll use a live example. I'm an expressive. So for me, in the beginning of my sales career, I could only really sell other expressives because that's who I understood. Here's the problem. That means at best, my closing rate could only get to 25% closing rate because I only mastered 1 out of the 4 sales elements here. What I'm going to invite you to think is you will naturally learn how to actually increase your closing rate one by one, because if I even just mastered a secondary element, for example, I learned how to sell more drivers, I have a 25% increase of the type of people that I can sell. Continue to compound that, master all 4 elements. And what that means is no matter the personality type that I hop on with, I know exactly how to approach the conversation because I have the social acuity and the emotional adaptability to adapt my discovery, my pitch, and my closing accordingly, right? So why this is all important and why I made a longer video for this one specifically is this might be the one thing, if you take nothing else from this training protocol, you can increase the different types of people you can actually enroll and help simply because you're aware and have a framework to adapt to all different types of personality types, right? So that's it for today's training, guys. I encourage you to learn every single element, at least become aware, make an intention to maybe master the next element that you need to work on, right? And go from there. Because certain offers are going to attract more like certain type of elements, right? So if maybe you're on an accountant business offer, you're always attracting analyticals 80% of the time, and you might get an expressive here and there. But what happens if you change offers, right? If you go to, let's say, a coaching, let's say a more heart-centered coaching offer, you might be primarily dealing with the amiables and quote-unquote water type elements. So you might have a hard time ramping up on that offer if you don't know how to sell different types of elements. So that's how I really learned is I sold all different types of offers that allowed me to learn every single element and master them one at a time, right? I sold a roofing lead gen offer that really allowed me to learn how to sell to the analyticals and drivers, right? And then I hopped on more like heart-centered coaching offers, right? A mastermind that really attracted that type of people. So I learned how to sell more of the amiable types, right? So you don't need to switch offers to learn these different types, right? But I encourage you to start mastering one at a time all these different sales elements. So no matter what happens, no matter who hops on the call, you can serve and lead them powerfully. With that being said, guys, this is the Sales Bender training. Hope you guys liked it. If you have any questions, just drop it in the school community, drop it in the chat, wherever it might be, and we'll go from there. We'll talk soon. Cheers.